Personal identity comes out of our own experience, and it's our own partial and fragmentary way of understanding our experience, which is the experience of the whole social structure, of all of the relations which constitute the society and have constituted who we are. We can never understand everything just from our own perception. So identity is a way that we make sense of it all in our imaginations. One thing is that I knew that my identity could never serve as a foundation for politics or for anything else really, because it was so unstable. Even if I tried, I wouldn't have been able to have an identity that I could use as the basis for politics or for my own feeling of cohesion, feeling like I was all put together. I had one culture at home and another culture when I went to school, and I was all of those things together. So this was an important part of my experience. But it was also that I knew that there was a world outside of the United States. I knew the level of inequality that existed in the world because I saw it. At the moment of 9/11, I knew first of all that this kind of violence was not unique in the world. And in fact, in many cases, it was violence that had been perpetrated by the United States. I also found myself becoming much more the object of attention, because before I remember people hadn't even heard of Pakistan in the small town in central Pennsylvania I grew up in. After 9/11 they had heard of it, and then I got a lot of attention. These were different ways of experiencing identity. Identity as confusion, identity as racism, and so on. When you form an identity, for example a racial identity, let's say that my identity as Asian or Pakistani was formed partly out of the discrimination I experienced growing up in the United States. If I then go on to reclaim this identity, to say that I'm proud of it and so on, and this kind of thing has happened in history many times, there will be an element of resistance to it. I'm resisting the prejudices that said I was inferior. But at the same time, I will be locked into the same structure, that I will be reclaiming what the structures of racism have made me into. And that means that I will be reproducing that structure. And so that is the dilemma. You have had many movements historically against racism, sexism, and other kinds of oppression that had their goal as transforming the whole social structure. They wanted to change all of society, and they were collective and mass movements. The way I understand identity politics is that it's something totally different from that. It's the kind of politics that we see today, which is about individual recognition of your own identity. It's the kind of politics which is about saying that if I speak in a political meeting, I speak as the representative of particular sexual, racial identity, and so on. If somebody has a privilege of some kind of identity, some aspect of their identities, then what they can say and talk about is constrained. That, I think, is a very different politics, and it's not a politics that wants to change the social structure. It's a politics which is about individual recognition, and so I think that has to be distinguished very much from the movements that are against racism and misogyny, that are important movements and that deserve to have a radical and collective basis. You have to have, for example, a movement against the police and the violence of the police. If we talk at the level of identity, we can't conceive of a mass movement against the police. And a mass movement against the police will be a coalition. It may be driven by the fact that the police is a racist institution, and that the police attack black people at disproportionate rates, and that this is a level of violence that it constitutes terrorism. But it has to be fought by masses of people. And it has to be an issue which matters to everyone. The fact that black people are killed disproportionately by police should not only matter to black people. Everyone should be angry about it, and everyone should fulfill their obligation to fight against it. I agree that many movements are too white, and it's for this reason that identity politics can become so powerful. Instead of taking the steps that are needed to change that, people accuse each other and make each other feel guilty and so on. And then there is some feeling of moral superiority, but the situation doesn't change. The organization is still white. So I think this is a serious problem, and it has to be, you have to address it at the organizational level and find ways to make the organization more representative of the populations that it's trying to, that it's advocating for. At the same time, we should also recognize that these movements are too middle class. Okay, the movements don't represent the poorest sectors of the population, including various other groups. You know, in the United States, in most leftist organizations, there aren't that many poor whites either. And so that's another organizational issue. How do you reach these populations that are excluded from politics? And I think this is a very important strategic question. The change will have to be from mass movements that are outside the state. And it is possible to have changes within the state. You can have Lula and Bernie Sanders and people like that. But ultimately, when they enter into the state, they will try to reproduce their own position in the state, and they will have to accept the rules that the state operates by. You saw that happen. And so the only way to prevent that from happening is if there are movements outside the state which put pressure on politicians and prevent them from making these compromises. And ultimately, if these movements grow in strength, they can go beyond the politicians. But in some cases, politicians can popularize different ideas. In the US, Bernie Sanders made many young people interested in left politics. But there is a risk now that they will think that what we have to do is run more candidates and get more candidates in office. And when that happens, you might have left-wing candidates providing left-wing justifications for the same old shit. So that's why you need movements outside. The book has been out for a little over a year, and I would say maybe the first 6 months I was attacked for not taking race and gender seriously enough. And then for the second half of the time, I was attacked for taking them too seriously, for being too fixated on them. I have had exactly opposite criticisms, which is very confusing. But I think what it means is that the issues are very complex, and so to try to take a subtle position, to try to take a position which is not crude and that really understands the complexities, or tries to, means that people who are on extremes will see you as on the other side. I hope that this is overcome, because I think, you know, many people see the book as contributing to a difficult conversation about issues that are complicated and can't be reduced to slogans. And I think there is a lot of good work and a lot of good thinking that other people are doing on these questions. And so I think identity politics is very much a discourse of attacking people and being satisfied with yourself. And I think that further discussions of problems of racism, problems of class, problems of sexism, and other forms of oppression, if these can be conversations which are not about attacking each other, but about building new kinds of solidarity, this will be the kind of development that we need.